some of you have already been through what we're going to talk about today in various iterations in other classes of mine. Frankly, I don't think you can ever get enough of this. I want to really talk about serious conversation about doing estimates and estimating. So I want to go through that part. I also want to talk about promotional pieces today, self-promotion. We're going to have a quick blow through on that part. Both of those things are going to be important. The self-promotion stuff is an assignment that's going to be due on our final class. It's not anything that's like overwhelming. It's just something to start getting you to think about. It's something, what I really think about in the self-promotion. I want to sort of plant the seed, but I also want you to ultimately, at the very least, come away with a leave behind or something like that. So that's going to be sort of where we go, or what today is going to be about. I feel like I can get through this hopefully pretty quickly, but I don't want to blow through it too fast. And then today's a shooting day. So if you guys are ready, after, we'll spend just whatever the rest of the day is with you guys shooting, and we'll go from there. Before we get started though, how is everyone? Good. Did everyone sort of have an okay Thanksgiving? Did people go home? Did people stay and not do anything?
I went home.
And how was home?
I know I moved to Chicago.
Yeah. Okay, then. On that note, we're going to get sort of started. If you can do me a favor and log into our website, there's a lot of material there that I'd like you to, we'll work with today. But there are also some things that that I think that you should download, things that I think that you should keep and that you can use as time goes on. So we'll sort of go through a lot of this stuff. I'll try to get through it, like I said, as fast as I can, but I don't want to cheat anybody out of anything in this. So we're going to start on, if you can go to session number 4, resources. That's where I've actually added a bit of content. So if you've been following and going through all the resources all along the way, more than half of this stuff was already there, but I've added a couple of other things. So I just wanted you to be aware that there's new content that's in there for us to talk about. And what I'd like to start with in talking about, I just want to point out a few things. I'm not going to read them to you. I just think that it's really important for you to actually read them. And so when it comes to actually doing an estimate or doing a bid or trying to figure all of that out, there are a whole series of things that we need to consider, that we need to take into consideration. And one of the most difficult things in taking into that consideration is, number one, what you really are worth, what it is that you really sort of need to be charging as a baseline. That's a place that we need to start. We need to figure that out for you. We need to figure out, again, what is the minimum that you can make to actually say yes to a job, because there will come the point where people are going to want you to do work and it simply won't be worth it to you, either financially or for some other reason. And there are other reasons. So people will work, for instance, a perfect example for me is if I got offered to shoot a Vogue cover and they told me that they were going to pay me nothing for it, would I do that? Well, of course I would do that. I mean, the value that I could take away from actually having that exposure would be absolutely worth it. So I wouldn't even consider that. However, what if every single client in my life approached it the very same way? And I was like just seduced by all of these, amazing opportunities to do this, that, or the other, but I never made any money. Well, I would starve to death. So that isn't an option for me. So there's got to be some balance in there. And so to start off the balance, we need to figure out, basically, again, what is the cheapest you can actually work for and make a living and not go into debt. So there's a number of things that are set up to actually help do this, but the one that I use and the one that I recommend is, if again, under session 4 resources, under the support section, you'll see that there's a web link to an nppa.org calculator. If you could actually launch that with me, that'd be great. We'll take a look through it. I'm not actually going to ask you guys to do this right now, but I do want to explain sort of what it is that's going on in here. So this is a calculator that is designed, and it actually has, it was built for photographers. However, any freelancer can actually do this. But at any rate, I just want to sort of give you the idea of what's going on in here, and then you guys can actually do it on your own. But at any rate, so if you take a look at the, as you open it up, it'll give you a little blurb explaining sort of what's going on. What's important about this too, though, is to understand, we're going to start with the expense part of this whole section right here. That link did work for you guys, right? Okay. So I'm going to start at the very top one where it says office and/or studio. If you take a look at that, you will notice that there's a little blue dot right next to the word that's actually got a question mark in it. And if you click on that, or it's a question mark or an exclamation point, I can't see it on my screen. But anyway, if you click on it, it will actually open it up and it will explain exactly the expense that they're looking for you to actually include in on this. So, and the values that we're putting in on this are yearly values. So if you know, for instance, that your cell phone costs you $100 a month, then the value that you would put in for a phone would actually be $1,200. So again, they're asking for yearly expenses here, not monthly expenses. The thing about, and the only reason I bring up this office and/or studio one first is that this thing will calculate your cost of doing business, which is what we're trying to figure out. What is your real cost of doing business? I always suggest that people include their regular rent in this as well. I suggest that you include all of your expenses in here, because it's not enough. If you strictly separate the business from your life, then you really get a skewed sort of like a snapshot of it. So in most cases, I don't know about this for certain, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say in most cases, none of you guys are renting a studio independent from your living situation right now. So this would actually complicate that if you didn't include it. So whatever your rent expenses are. Now, if you're living at home with mom and dad, and which is fine, you need to figure, again, in this whole scenario, I would be honest with yourself about that. Is that situation going to last for the next 6 months? Is that going to last for the next, 5 years? If it's going to be the next 5 years, then you can actually leave that blank unless you're paying mom and dad something in your rent. Otherwise, you actually need to say, okay, well, for the next 6 months, I'm living with mom and dad. But then the truth of it is I've got to go out and get my own place, and that's going to cost me, $1,800 a month or whatever. You need to be as honest with yourself about this as you possibly can, because what we're going to try to do is come up with how much it actually costs you to live a year. So I'm just going to go out on a limb and ask, is there anybody in this room right now who has any idea what your true yearly budget is? What does it cost you to live a year? You have any idea? Okay, so this is why this matters. In trying to come up and establish what fee you should be charging, what we need to do, and what this calculator will help you do, is figure out what it costs you to live for a year, and then it will also take into account your expected income for a year. How many days can you really ultimately work and bill for it? And then in doing that, we can actually establish what your baseline rate should actually be. So we're going to go through this a little bit more, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. So anyway, I'm going to actually put in, I will do this putting in a set of my figures. So because I'm sort of at that beginning to be at that stage of the game. So my office and/or studio expenses here, and it's really funny that they've got $4,800 in here. I don't know who they do this with, but that would actually be, if anybody's doing that, that's more like, that seems to be more like a monthly rate than it does a yearly rate. But anyway, I digress. So I'm going to do what mine is a year. So my yearly rent is $42,000. My cell phone is $1,200. And I'm just doing tabbing to go through this. Photo, video, and equipment. Now, if you take a look at what they say here, what they're asking you to actually come up with here is that what are your anticipated expenses? How often are you going to be buying cameras, computers? How often are you going to be upgrading that part? Now, you might say to yourself, well, I'm not going to buy anything this year, but that means next year maybe you're going to buy something. You need to look at it in the broader picture. So if you figure you're going to spend $10,000 in gear over the next 5 years, you would put $2,000 into this. If you have all the gear you think you're ever going to own, then you probably should be putting in something here just to keep maintenance going. Right, so I'm going to just put in $1,500 here because just sort of as a general kind of sort of a catch-all right here. This is going to be actually new audio equipment, so this is going to be things like I don't know whether really. Oh, this is like more accessory stuff, that kind of stuff. So I'm going to change that. We'll put in 1,000 instead. New equipment, I'm going to put in 1,500. Computers, I actually just got given a new computer by the college. Wasn't that sweet of them? So I'm going to put 0 into that. My broadband and internet is $600 a year. Web hosting is probably $150 a year. Vehicles and expenses, again, this would be either your lease, your insurance, all that kind of stuff. So I'll put in $1,500 for that. Office supplies, $500. Posting and budget, shipping, $500. Professional development, this would be, are you taking classes? Are you studying? Blah, 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 blah. I'm going to put in 0 for that. Advertising and promotion, $2,500. Subscriptions and dues, $50. I don't subscribe to a whole lot of stuff. Equipment and business insurance is $1,200 a year. Health insurance, because I'm really lucky and I've actually get my health insurance through Columbia, but it still is $1,800 a year. My legal expenses, because I'm incorporated, is $6,000 a year. Taxes and so this would be business self-employment taxes, all of that kind of stuff. I'm going to hold off on this one here. We'll talk about that later, so I'm going to leave it blank for the time being. Office assistant, so I don't hire people to do, I do all of my own office work, that kind of stuff. So I'm going to leave that at 0. My utilities are 70 times 12, $850 a year. And my travel and entertainment, I'm going to put in 3,000. So in coming up with all of this, what you can actually see right here is my total annual expenses are $89,760. And you will be shocked when you actually do this. There's a real consistency in here. I've had students do this over and over and over, and the cheapest, lowest end I've ever seen was somebody was about $30,000. It was somebody who was living at home and really lied about all of this because I was like, so what about your cell phone? And they're like, oh, well, my parents pay for the cell phone. And I was like, okay, well, what about your rent? And they're like, well, I'm living in my mom's basement. And I was like, okay, well, what about your internet? She goes, oh, well, my mom pays for that. I mean, clearly mom was paying for everything. So, but that doesn't give you a really realistic snapshot. I mean, so if that is your scenario, your case, fine, but you need to imagine what it's going to be like when you really do go out into the real world. So the goal in this is not to sort of cheat your way about it. The goal in this is to try to be pretty much as honest as you can possibly be about this. Make sense? Okay, so then, we're almost done with this part. So then income factors, and there is a difference in all of this part right here. So we have down here desired annual salary, and then we also have here a place to put in income that has nothing to do with your business. So for me, my desired salary income here, this is different than covering all of your expenses. So here's the deal. If right now you can see in my case that it's costing me $89,760 to live, that's what my expenses are going out every single year. If I make $89,760, I break even. I can pay all my bills, but I don't save anything. I don't. There's no take home for me. I don't get anything else out of that. So that's just breaking even. So in the field where it says desired annual salary, what you put into that field is what it is that you really want over and above. Does that sort of make sense, everyone? Okay, this is going to scale is going to change. So realistically, when you guys, a lot of you guys are already shooting, a lot of you guys are already working, but a lot of you guys are also getting ready to graduate and are going to be starting up this business or on your own and going to have to be dealing with exactly this. What do you think is a reasonable amount of money to make your first year out of school? Now, not total, I'm saying you cover all of your expenses over and above. What can you put in the bank? What could you save? What could you blow on cocaine? I don't know, but not money that you need. Your expenses are all covered. First year out, on top of that, what would you like to actually make? Anybody? What would be a reasonable thing to make? Well, would $200,000 be reasonable? Probably ambitious. Right. So the way that I tend to think of it, and you guys can think of it as well, and you can see it on a sliding scale. I'm trying to be as honest and legitimate about this as I can. I don't think this does anybody any good to look at these things or to do these things, exercises, and really put in some sort of fantasy about it all. I just don't think that helps anyone. So what I would say is that if you came out of Columbia College, you graduated, and your first year as a photographer, and this can function as all the combinations of photographer, digital tech assistant, photographer, digital tech assistant, retoucher, all of that, can all be combined in this. Your photo business, as it was. I would say that if you paid for all of your expenses, paid for everything, and made $5,000 on top of that your first year out, that would not be a bad year. It's not be a great year, but it wouldn't be a bad year. At least you'd be in business. You'd be making money. But then in your second year, I would say that your ambition or your goal should be to double that. And it should then be 10 in your second year. And if you add $5,000 a year every single time, in 8 years, you're up to 40 grand. In 10 years, you're up to 50. Maybe you're more ambitious about that. Maybe you could say, okay, I'm going to double it every year. So my first year will be 5, my second year will be 10, my third year will be 20, my fourth year will be 40. My fifth year will be 80. And that's a reasonable thing to assume. It's a reasonable goal to assume. Is this sort of making sense to everyone? So I need you to be honest with yourself about this, as far as the numbers that you actually generate in here, because this information is really going to help set the base for you. So in my case, because I actually have been doing this quite some time, I'm going to cover my expenses, and I'm going to say I want $50,000 in take home. I'm not going to put in any additional income here. That additional income part there would be actually considered things like anything. If anybody in here a gambler, does anybody gamble? Just curious. Like for a living, my godfather. Well, he wasn't really my godmother's father was a professional gambler, and he made an absolute fortune doing it. And I always thought, wow, that sounded like such a great life, but it wasn't. Anyway, I digress. Okay, so anyway, but it would be from like stocks and bonds. It would be any other thing. It would be, I don't know, you're still on an allowance for somebody. You've got, alimony, whatever it is. Anyway, I'm not going to put anything in for that. And the final thing we need to do is figure out the number of billing days that you can do. And this one becomes the tricky one. Most of the rest of this is pretty straightforward. So The way you can figure it is this. And again, when you guys are first starting out, it's going to be more of a mix. It's going to be, okay, I'm doing a couple of days of assisting. I'm doing a couple of days of digital teching. I'm doing one day of shooting, whatever. It's not as cut and dried as it will be in the 3 or 4 years when you reach the point that all you are doing is shooting and that it's just a photo studio part. So I'm going to figure this based on just being a photographer, because that's the stage that I'm at. You're going to have to take some liberty in this, and there's going to be a couple things I need you to write down, and this is probably going to be one of them right now. So make sure that you get something to actually jot this down with. So as a photographer, what you can typically expect to do is you can typically expect to, for every single shooting day that you have, is going to be 3 days of work. You're going to have a prep day, you're going to have a shooting day, and you're going to have a post day. Now, in most cases for photographers, in some cases you can bill for your prep days, and in some cases you can bill for your post days, but that's not really the kind of thing, prep and post, that I'm talking about. I'm just talking about what's involved in this. So for instance, I can have a prep day to go in the studio. I can have a pre-light day and go into the studio and get paid for that. I do not get paid for actually sitting down and doing an estimate for a job. That day or 2 days that it takes me to actually do that estimate, I don't get paid for that. So, and then in the post days, it all has to do with editing film, getting that stuff to my clients, following up with them, all of that kind of stuff. Again, I don't get paid for that. So in terms of thinking about this, again, the rule of thumb for photography is for every billing day that you've got, there's actually 2 others that you don't get to bill for. So if you are thinking about a typical work week or a work year for a photographer, it would be 80 shooting days. And the reason it's 80 shooting days is that, again, on the 3-day rule, if you multiply 3 times 80, you come up with 240 days, which is typically 5 days a week for 50 weeks. You get 2 weeks for vacation. Does that sort of make sense? So on the little thing that you write down, 80 would actually be a good year. It would be a normal year. 60 days would actually translate into 180 days of, so 60 days of billing would translate into 180 days of actually your time. That's also an okay year. It's not a great year, but it's an okay year. I mean, if you really think about it, you're still working 3 days a week. That's not a bad thing to do as a freelancer. 40 days a week, you're going to be struggling. 40 days a year, you're going to be struggling. That's 120 days. That means basically you're working 2 days a week. You can get by on that, but that's going to be a stretch. That's going to be a stretch. So that's sort of like going on the downside. On the upside, going up to 100 days, that means you're working 300 days a year. That means you are working 6 days a week. You've got 1 day off a week. If you go to 120 days, that means you're working 360 days a year. It means you're working every single day. You don't take a day off, 7 days a week. You have no life. Your significant other will leave you. Your family will not know who you are. Don't think about raising children. Get rid of the pets. Get rid of the plants, because you're not going to have time to water them. It's just, you are consumed. So that's kind of the scale that you've got to figure out here in this. So if we go back to my previous when I was only shooting and I wasn't actually doing any teaching at all, whatever, 100 days would actually be a pretty good guesstimate to what I was actually billing. So I'm going to leave that 100 in there. And so you can see then in the results that we've actually got down here, what it's actually going to cost. So basically the long and the short, the simplest of it all is, given all the numbers that I've actually placed in here, what it's actually saying, what I'm saying is that I have $89,760 worth of expenses for the entire year. Out of that, I can bill 100 days, 100 shooting days. So I simply divide that $89,760 by by 100 days, and I get $897.60. That is the cheapest rate that I can bill for a day of shooting and stay in business. If I go below that, I go out of business. I will lose money. Now, you can lose money for a while, but you can't build a business on losing money unless you're Donald Trump. Is this making sense? So what this will do is this, if you really are honest about this and go through this, this will set your base rate for you. It'll give you some idea of what your cheapest rate should actually be. Now, the irony of this is that the more days that you actually work, the lower this number becomes. So let's say that you're not figuring this just on shooting. Let's say that you're figuring this as a photo assistant. So as a photo assistant, you don't have that 3-day rule. Your 100 days here would actually just be the number of days that you actually go to be a photo assistant. So in that case, 100 days would be you're working 2 days a week. Hopefully as a photo assistant, you get something a little bit steadier than that. So we'll see what happens if you bump this up to 250. What am I still missing? All right, 0, sorry. So at 250 days, it tells me that I need to, as an assistant, be making, I need to be billing $359.04 a day. That sets my base rate for that. Does that make sense what's going on here? But again, as a photo assistant, the chances are that you're going to be taking home $40,000 over and above your expenses to live is probably unrealistic. This again would probably be closer to like a $5,000 thing. Again, just sort of trying to calculate, you know, where you're going to be at in that whole issue right here. And see if I can do that. Submit again. And 250 days. And it looks like this whole thing is kicked back. Yeah, it's kicked back to its original expenses, meaning I'm going to have to go through all of these again. But you guys get where this whole thing is going. You could even do this. You don't even need to use this calculator per se. You can use this as a checklist and simply go through it and figure out basically what your rate is. So in all of the years that I've done this and the entire range of people that have actually done it, group of students basically in your stage of the game right here, the cheapest I ever saw was $30,000 a year was what somebody thought it was going to cost them to do this. The most I ever saw was $150,000 a year, which was like wildly optimistic. I'll just put it in that way. Most people in your all's group, whatever, the sort of range that they came out with was in sort of in the $60,000 to $80,000 range. So you say, okay, let's just call it $60,000. So I'm going to do the math on this really quickly. And let's say that you're going to work 3 days a week. So that would be divided by 150 days. That gives you a base rate of $400. That would be your minimum bill. That would be the minimum that you would have to bill every single day to actually have a job, to do a job. Does that make sense to everyone, what we're looking for here? Okay, so that at least gives you a base place for you to actually start. So now we need to talk about something completely different. And again, if you can take a look in our session 4 resources, I'm not going to actually read this out, but I'm going to beg you to please read the Jeff Sedlick on usage PDF. This is one of the guys. who first pioneered the idea of usage, and usage is the thing that matters most to us when we talk about actually doing photography. So usage gets to be a hard thing to explain, but I'm going to try to get through this. Again, some of you, if not all of you, a couple of you I know haven't been through this with me before, but most of you have. So the way to think about usage is this. If I go to rent a car and it costs me $100 a day to rent the car, what's it going to cost me to rent the car for 2 days? Any idea? You can hold up fingers.
$200.
Exactly. And if I rent the car for 5 days?
500.
Exactly. So it's very easy to see and to think about it in those terms. The more I use the car, the more it costs me. It's just that simple. That is what usage is about. The problem that we run into with photography is that everybody thinks about photography or billing photography or estimating the cost of photography based on time, and it isn't. So I'm sure enough of you have done enough jobs, no matter what level that they are, is people will call you up and say, well, what's your day rate? What's your hourly rate? Do you guys get those calls? Yep. You don't have one. From this point on, you do not have one. Because the problem is that they are asking you to treat your photography as not as what it is, but you as an employee and the time it takes you to actually do that work. And that has got nothing to do with the photography itself. So I'm going to backtrack here a little bit. We're going to still stay on this topic of usage, but what is copyright?
It's
Anyone?
like a written law that protects artists from other artists stealing their work.
Right. What it really does is it implicitly gives you the ownership and the right to control your work. That's what it really boils down to. When does copyright, when do you get it?
When you register for it.
Anybody else? Any ideas? The instant you create the work, you own the copyright to it. The very instant you create it. The problem and the issue about registration is that even though you implicitly own it, you do not have to register it to actually have the copyright. However, you do have to register it if you're going to sue somebody for copyright. So you have the copyright. You own the copyright the minute it is created. That is an inherent thing. You don't have to do anything about it other than have created the work. However, if somebody steals that image from you and actually exploits it, and you decide you're going to haul them into court for it, you actually have to have it registered, or a court will not allow you to walk into court without it being registered. Does that make sense to everyone? How much would it take to get you to sue somebody for copyright? What would the work have to be worth? Would you sue somebody for 50 bucks? No. I'm getting a lot of head shaking. No. Well, so at what point would you sue them? At what point would it have to be worth it for you to go through that? Would you think? $1,000?
It would have to be a big project because then you have to include your lawyer fees.
Okay, so this is what I wanted to talk about here. Again, this is going to be a little bit of a rambling day here in terms of this conversation, but I feel like I want you guys to know this. This is just as important as anything else we've gone through in this class. The truth of it is, anything between $0 and $5,000, you do not need a lawyer. You can actually go to small claims court, and it's just like on fucking TV. It's just like Judge Judy. You go in, the plaintiff is in there, you're on one side, they're on the other. You bitch about what they did, they bitch about what you did, and the judge says, okay, here's what's going to happen, and that's it. You don't pay court costs, you don't pay legal, you don't pay a lawyer, you don't pay any of that kind of stuff. So If you're going to sue somebody for copyright and it's less than $5,000, you can do that, and you can do it on your own. But when I ask about, if you would do that for 50 bucks, fuck, $50 won't cover your parking downtown. So you're not going to go do that for 50 bucks, right? $2,500, that might actually be worth your time. 5,000 could easily be worth your time if it's just a day in court, right? So again, something that you need to sort of like consider. However, beyond $5,000, anywhere between $5,000, this is another thing to please write down, because this is just something that is going to be with you for the rest of your life. Between $5,000 and $50,000, my lawyer likes to refer to that as no man's land. And what will happen in that range between the $5,000 and the $50,000 is your lawyer will take every single penny that you get. You will get nothing but satisfaction of winning a case. That's all you're going to get. You will not see a dime of that of the verdict. They will find in your favor. Yep, those people stole that image from you. Yep, we're going to give you $45,000. You might as well just say make the check out to the lawyer, because they are going to take it all. I promise you. From $50,000 and up, you actually stand to make some money. So just point this out. And this is not only about copyright infringement. This is about law in general, about anything that you would get into in any sort of legal issue in your practice. That very same sort of dynamic exists. That 5,000 to 50,000 is a very scary place to be, and in most cases not worth your time actually being there. Yes, you can get satisfaction, but no, you will not see a dime out of it. And if you've got to pay legal fees and court costs on top of that, then you're going to lose money. So it's a very, very, very scary place to be, and I cannot tell you how much I hope you never get in this situation where you have to do that and avoid it. So at any rate, back to what we were talking about, copyright. So the reason copyright becomes the foundation of all of this conversation is that copyright implicitly says you own your work and you get to say everything about what happens to it. You get to say who can use it, who can't use it, what they can do with it, what they can't do with it, when they can do it, when they can't do it. You control every single aspect of it. So when we talk about usage, what we are talking about is that you as the owner gets to license people to use your work for anything. So what would that really mean? Well, let's say somebody came to you and said, oh, I love that picture. I want to use it on the cover of my book. Oh, that'd be one thing. Somebody else says, I want to hire you to actually make a set of pictures for me to do advertising. I'm a fashion photographer. I want you to shoot my lookbook, or I want you to shoot an editorial piece for me, or I want you to shoot an advertising piece for me. All of that, those pictures that you shoot, you own those pictures. You then license that work to a potential client to use for a very specific set of things. They are not paying you for the time it takes you to do it. They are paying you for the license to use the work. And the reason this matters is this. Let's say that you get hired to shoot Giorgio Armani's latest perfume ad. And you're going to go in the studio. It's going to be 2 days in the studio, but you're a really well-established New York photographer, advertising photographer, and your creative fee per day, not your day rate, but your creative fee per day is $10,000. So all of a sudden you say, well, okay, this is great. I'm going to make 2 days of shooting. I'm going to make 20 grand on that. However, it turns out that Armani was only decided he was only going to, it was a test run. They were only going to use it for 6 months, and it was just a quick promotion and that's it, whatever. So you get your 20 grand and that's great. But what happens if all of a sudden the perfume becomes an icon? It becomes something that it's like Chanel No. 5. It becomes like this, it skyrockets. It becomes incredibly famous. And Armani decides that they are going to use your picture as the brand for that for the next 10 years. Well, now you're looking at $20,000 that you've made over a 10-year period, and that is nowhere near the same good deal as when you had it doing for 6 months. Does that make sense? And the problem is that you've tied the cost of that photography to the time it took you to make the image. And that has got nothing to do with its value. The value in photography is in your ability to license it for people to use, because it gives it an unlimited life. You can sell that image over and over and over and over again for the rest of your life. And it's got nothing to do with how long it took you to actually generate that photograph. Is this clear to everyone? Are there questions about any of this? So I have clients say this all the time. They don't understand usage. They don't, and I use the car rental analogy for them all the time. And I just say to them, would you expect to pay the same, the same to have that car for 1 day as for 5 days? Would you expect to pay? No, the more you're going to use it, the more you should pay for it. And that's what we need to talk about and think about when we actually do our bid here in photography, when we're actually going to do an estimate. Are we good on this part?
If that's just for freelance, what if, like, let's say you're like the head photographer for like a company, do you still apply that usage fee?
It's a great question. So what's going to happen in a company, and this can happen in a freelance situation as well. Every single freelance client that I have ever worked for has tried to slip in what they call a work for hire clause. So this goes back to the whole copyright issue. As long as you own the copyright, you can demand that you get paid usage. However, when you lose that copyright, or if you never owned the copyright to begin with, then that's a completely different story. And that's why I start this conversation always with the conversation about copyright. So let's say you go to work for Kohl's. Kohl's hires you as a staff photographer. The contract that you sign for Kohl's as a staff photographer will implicitly state that every photograph that you do for them, they own the copyright for. You are an employee of theirs. Therefore, even though you push the button, even though you're the one who's creating it and making the actual image, they own the copyright, and therefore you do not get any usage at all. If you're a freelancer working for Kohl's, the contract that they're going to ask you to sign there will have a work for hire clause in it. And what that means is it's exactly the same thing. You are temporarily working for them. They own the product of whatever you do that day. So the images that you make, they will own the copyright to that, and you get no usage for it. They will pay you for your time only. So again, those are the things that you want to try to avoid. However, this is not a cut and dried type of situation. So any contract can be amended. So but I'm telling you, every time you read a contract, there's going to be a work for hire clause in it. It's just standard practice, because if they can get away with it, it saves them money. That doesn't mean that you can't say to them, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do this work for hire. We need to take this out of the contract. I want to own the copyright. And in which case, all you guys do is you can just scratch it out of the contract. Both parties initialize it, and you're good to go. Then you will still own the copyright, and that won't exist. However, a client could come to you and say, I'm sorry, you either do work for hire or we're not going to hire you. And then you've got to decide, well, is this worth it to me? So I can tell you specifically, there's many cases where I was fine with work for hire. I used to do a ton of stuff for Sears. I would shoot Docker pants from the waist down. They paid me $2,500 a day to shoot fucking Dockers waist down pants. I was never going to do anything else with those photographs. I certainly wasn't going to sell them as stock. I wasn't going to put them up on my website. It wasn't going to make, didn't have a whole lot of value beyond that. It wasn't like all of a sudden I'm going to, I don't know, have the Docker commercial of all time or what. It was what it was. It was just what it was, right? And so I was thrilled to sign the work for hire contract because I was making, let's see, I'll do the math really quick. I was making $12,500 a week. And they would book me 3-4 weeks at a time. Sure, I'll do that. So I don't want to imply that all these things are negative or wrong or bad. I'm just trying to give you guys the real lay of the land, and so that you can make your own decisions, but understand what's really at stake. However, the flip side to that whole thing is that if I knew I was getting a chance to shoot, if I knew that I was going to get a chance to do a set of photographs or Prada's new perfume line, whatever, and they were going to use Taylor Swift as the model for it, that all of a sudden becomes a different thing, because that inherently has value beyond, again, if that's going to become their namesake perfume, then there's a really good likelihood that that perfume, that those pictures are going to have a life beyond, well beyond 6 months that typically fashion has. And so the potential for me to make a whole lot more money on usage exists, and therefore I would be much more reticent to sign a work for hire contract in that case. Make sense?
So if you do a work for hire contract, can you still use those photos for your book?
You have to get permission. Again, just like in every other case. In your case, if you own the copyright, nobody can touch your image or do anything with it without your permission. The same thing holds true for the company. If you do a work for hire, they own the copyright, and you have to get permission from them to do anything with that image. You may actually have to pay them to do that image. It's your image, or it's the image you made, but they own the copyright. And so, yeah, and it happens all the time, is people will do either work for hire, or people will actually sell their copyright, and in which case they have to turn around and then pay for it to get it back. Make sense? Okay, are there any other questions about this part? Okay, so anyway, please do me a favor and read the Jeff Sedlick thing on usage. That's actually a really important one for us. We've gone through the calculator. I want everybody really quickly, we're just gonna take a quick look at these, and then I'm gonna do a really fast one with you guys. So the next thing down under the support thing is this estimate checklist. I want you to click on this and open this guy up. It's strictly a PDF that will allow you to, it sort of gives you a list of things that you should be considering. And this is one of the problems that you run into in doing bidding and doing estimates, is that people will call you up and say, Ellie, I've got, this is the job I've got. It's a half a day of shooting fashion in the studio, one model. Can you give me a ballpark idea of what it'll cost? And at that stage of the game, you say no. What do you say other than no? It's the standard line. If you write nothing else down, write this down right now. When anyone calls you and say, because this is always going to happen, they're going to call you and say, can you just give me a ballpark figure? And you say to them, and word for word, you say to them, I'm terribly sorry, but I'm on set shooting right now, and I cannot put this together right now. I will get this to you first thing in the morning. I don't care if you just woke up and you're in your pajamas. I don't care if you're standing in the shower and they can hear the water running. I don't care what it is. You are on set shooting, and I will get back to you sometime tomorrow. I know you need it really fast. I'll do my best to get it to you in the morning. But you never, ever, ever give anybody an answer on the phone like that, ever. What will happen is, and I can promise you this, I can guarantee this, you will underbid what it really will be. And then even though they said it's just a ballpark, whatever, every single client in the world will hold you to the number that you give them. And they will, well, you told me it was only going to be $20,000. How on earth did you come up with 32? Well, because I sat down and actually did the estimate. I'm just telling you this is going to happen, and just, you can't do that. They're also going to ask you for your day rate. And you're going to say to them, I don't work with day rates. I work with usage, and we need to talk about that usage. What are you going to do with it? How long are you going to do with it? Where are you going to do it? Anyway, this thing that I just opened up is just a quick little checklist. Now, this is one that you can do, you can use if you want to do this out by hand. I've given you the stuff to actually do one electronically, and we'll take a look at that. But I just sort of wanted to go through what these things are. And the advantage of having this is that if you need, somebody wants to really talk about stuff, on the phone, again, my suggestion is you get off the phone and actually do this when you really have the time to think it out. But if they insist on doing it, you need to actually pull out something like this that you can refer to and ask questions about. So again, if you look at the top right here, you know, so how many days are we going to do this? What is the usage on this? Do you have pre-production in this? Do you have post in this? Whatever. It's just a checklist to actually be able to go through. The next one down, the estimate questionnaire. If you actually open this guy up, this is actually, again, the things, the information that you want to collect before you do your estimate. So this part becomes really critical, because one of the things that you do not want to do is get off the phone. So an art buyer calls you and says, I've got a 2-day project for you. I need an estimate on this. Can you get it to me tomorrow morning? And you say yes. The last thing in the world that you want to do is call them back 20 minutes later and say, by the way, how many colors of seamless are we doing? And then hang up the phone and then call them back another 20 minutes after that and say, how big of a studio do we really need to do this? And then call them back 20 minutes later. Didn't forgot to ask, are we doing this in Chicago? Are we doing this in Florida? You know, you just don't want to do that. You want to get all of the questions out of the way in the very beginning, and this is a good checklist for that. Next thing down, the estimate contract. Now, there's a gazillion different forms of this, but this is actually one that was put out by I think this is an APA one. I'm not entirely certain about this. This is probably about as bare bones as that you can actually get, but all of the stuff that we are going to talk about here in doing estimates, you need all of this on paper. You need it all spelled out, written out, and signed. You cannot do estimates on the phone. You can't give people numbers on the phone. You need all of this stuff established, because the truth of it is that when you go ahead and do the job and all of a sudden you send them a bill for $50,000 and they come back to you and they say, well, this isn't what we agreed to. And you'll say, well, sure, it's what we agreed to. I've got the estimate confirmation right here. So that's a very different bargaining position to be in than saying, well, don't you remember when we were on the phone and I told you it was going to be $50,000? That just doesn't cut it. So anyway, this is a very abbreviated version of one. The next thing down, and this does have its own set of terms and conditions added to this. Again, terms and conditions are also things that can be amended. So at any rate, just to realize that that's where this whole part is. I'm not going to turn this into a business class, but I just want you guys to be aware of all of this. The next thing down is another list of terms and conditions. It's actually the same thing that's on the very back of that of the estimate form that I just showed you. Invoice calculator and macro. If you guys have been in one of my previous classes, you should have this. If you haven't, I need all of you to download this right now. So if you'll just click on this link, we're actually going to use this to do an estimate today. So if you've already got it, great, find it. If you haven't, click on this link. It's 2 Excel spreadsheets that exist in there. And then finally, underneath that is another Excel spreadsheet that is for equipment rental cost. You could please download that one as well. These are my gifts to you. This is the product of years of my work, and it's what I use to actually build my estimates. And then finally, there is a timesheet in here. It's called a timesheet, a 30-minute interval timesheet, if you could download that as well. They're all 3 Excel spreadsheets. Now, if you do not have Excel, all of these will work except for the macro sheet on the calculator that's at the very top. That will not work in Apple Pages or Google, whatever Google spreadsheet is. All of these others, the rest of it all will actually work in any spreadsheet pretty much that you can put together. Anything you can read an Excel spreadsheet, it will actually work into. But the macro has got a very nice touch to it. So does anybody not have this stuff downloaded? Because I want you to do this with me. So is everybody does have it downloaded? Okay, if you unzip the calculator, I'm gonna go ahead and do mine just because I'll run it from the same place that you guys are gonna do yours. So the experience is just the same. So I am going to download it and then go to the folder. It is a zip file. If you double click on it, it will actually open up in a folder. And inside that folder, there are two files. One is called calcmac_2007, and the other is US calculator _2018. Now, I update the prices on this every couple of years. This is my most recent version, and these are still the numbers that I'm using right now. You can update the pricing at any given point in this. So it's not like you've got to use my prices. You can actually do it. However, if you're going to get the calculator the macro to work, and if you don't understand what the macro is, you'll see it in a second. You need to keep these in the same folder. They're going to look for each other in the same folder. So if you only launch the US invoice calculator, if you just double click on that one, it should automatically open up the other one, and you should get a warning sign saying, do you want to enable macros or not? Did that happen for all of you? Go ahead and enable macros. If that second sheet didn't open up, so you can now look, if you go up to Excel and take a look at your windows, you should have two spreadsheets that are open. You should have one that is actually the invoice calculator itself. And then if you look at the other sheet, the one that's called CalcMac 2007, basically it is a small program that I wrote to actually cull the information from your invoice calculator and put it in presentable format. So if it didn't open automatically, simply open it manually. You need to have both of these open. Once they're both open in Excel, they'll work. That's all that matters. So if it didn't automatically open for some reason, just go ahead and make sure that both of these guys are open. Is everybody good on this part? Okay. So we're only going to do work here in the US invoice calculator, and I'm going to just give you a kind of a quick tour around there to talk about what's really going on here. So I'm going to go back to usage for just 1 second. When we talk about usage, the way usage works is basically this. There's a whole series of, and I think actually maybe, hold on 1 second. There may be a pretty good list on one of these. No, hang on 1 second. No, it'll end up being under that Jeff Sudik part. Actually, hang on 1 second. Maybe it's here. I thought, sorry guys, I thought I actually had this for you. So yeah, here it is. Go back to our website, our Canvas site really quickly. And under readings, there is a guide to bidding and estimating. This will give you that same sort of what we're really talking about here. But what this does is this helps give you the definition of what you need to think of in usage. So when we talk about usage, again, you've got to figure out how much your photography is really going to be used. So for instance, if one of the examples that I use here all the time, you've done the ultimate picture of Chicago, and the Columbia College Chicago Chronicle comes to you and says, we would love to use your picture on as the cover for a cover story. And you would say, okay. And so again, the Chronicle probably puts out 2,000 copies of itself. It's got a local audience. It doesn't really have a national audience. Out of that 2,000 copies, between the people who pick it up and the pass around rate is probably maybe 5,000 eyeballs are going to hit it. So that gives you some idea. It's local in Chicago, 5,000 people will see it. There's 2,000 hard copies of it will be made. That gives you one sense of usage, right? But then let's say that National Geographic approaches you and says, we're doing a cover story on the city of Chicago. We want to use your picture on the cover story of National Geographic. Well, then all of a sudden now you've got a circulation of 1 million. It's not only national, it's actually worldwide. it's a completely different ball game here. The number of people that are going to see it, the distribution area, all of that is completely different. National Geographic also is going to plug their Chicago issue on their National Geographic TV channel. So then all of a sudden your image is going to appear on television. It's going to appear as advertising, and just can go on and on and on. This list right here will help give you the things that you need to figure out. So in the top of it, you'll see what is the distribution. And again, that's usually about area or geography. That's what we call it, geography. Geography can be local, national, international. Those are basically the three that we would use. In some cases, you can split international up. So you could do, for instance, and I know Mizell does this when he does his Prada work, he will charge for the United States, he'll charge for Europe, he'll charge for Asia, and he'll charge for South America. Those are 4 different regions that he will actually use, instead of an international, which would only be 1. Make sense? And he does it because he can get more usage out of it. He makes more money. So the first one would be geography. And then the next one down, and you'll see that it breaks down into different things. You can have trade advertisements. You can have consumer advertising. You can have collateral, and collateral is what I primarily shoot. And that would be things like catalogs, internet brochures, direct mail pieces. I also do point of sale, all of those kind of things. Those would be separate usages as well. We call those media. So we'll talk about media again. Website is one media, catalog is another media. When we do our bid, we'll actually talk about that part. And this will help break it down again for you. It tells you what point of sale is, what direct mail is, blah, 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 blah. Packaging is another possibility here. So this will sort of work you through that part. And then time. And time is, how long are they going to do this? How long are you going to use this? Now, a lot of you guys are thinking about careers in fashion. One of the things that you need to know about fashion, one of the downsides to shooting fashion is that fashion is very time sensitive. The picture that you shoot of a dress today is worth, it's got a lifespan of maybe 3 months, maybe 6 at tops. But unless you're shooting, you know, like Gap t-shirts that exist every single, you know, the t-shirt is the same every single year, year in and year out. Most fashion has a lifespan of 6 months, and that's it. So we don't get to bill a lot of time on in fashion for usage, simply because clients don't want to use it for anything more than 6 months or a year, whatever. But those would be sort of the basics. The other things that you can consider in this would be exclusivity. And what exclusivity means is that I do a picture for Prada, and it's again, the Taylor Swift, whatever picture. And Prada wants it to be wants exclusive usage of that. They don't want me to be able to sell that picture to anyone else. They don't want me to be able to use it for anything else. Well, there's inherent value in that. And that, again, that would be a restricted usage on that, but it would be usage nonetheless. So this is sort of the parameters that we need to think about. All right, so does everybody have that calculator open? All right, so I'm going to give you a quick little scenario here. And I tell you, yeah, I'm going to give you the setup here for the scenario. And I'm going to try to get through really quickly the timing on this. We'll take a break and we'll come back to this and continue on. Okay. So what I'm going to do, the setup I'm going to give you is this. I am hired by, I'm just going to do it Lord & Taylor. And even though Lord & Taylor just went bankrupt, let's pick somebody who's in business. Let's do Saks. And what Saks wants me to do is 5-day shooting, so 5 days. And what they want me to shoot is a catalog. And they also want to use that in magazine advertising. So what they're going to do is, from the images that we do for the catalog, they're going to pull select work out and use in advertising. And they're going to run ads in like Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, that kind of stuff. That's what they're going to do. So again, it would be catalog plus advertising. So when we look at this whole setup that we've got going on here, what I know is this. For my usage, the way I'm going to bid my usage out is this. I look at the geography, and the geography is going to be national. There is no Saks in Paris. There is no Saks in Mumbai. There is no Saks in Lima. It's only here in the United States. So it is going to be national. Then the media, we've actually got two medias here. One is going to be catalog and one is going to be advertising. That is considered as two medias, and that's the way I'm going to bid this out. So in my geography, I've got one place, the US, national. So I put down a 1. In my media, I've got two media. So I'm going to put in a 2 for that. And then the time frame that they're going to do this in. Again, it's fashion. It's going to be a 6-month turnaround. So there is only one time frame that I've got for this. You take those, and here, look at my screen right here. You can see I've got 1 geography, 2 media, and 1 time frame. You multiply these together, and what I end up with is 2. If I multiply 1 times 2, I get 2 times 1 again, I get 2. So all of that equals 2. This tells me I've got 2 usages that I'm actually going to bill for. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. The way you work, again, I told you, you do not quote day rates. However, you do figure this in your own mind as the number of days that you're going to shoot to do this. This is how this part would work out for me. So if we go back and we look at at my setup right here to do the photographic fee part, what my photographic fee is going to be, it's going to be 5 days. So I'm going to hit 5 days. My rate for them, so if you put a 5 into that little slot where it says number of units, if you hit the tab key, it will take you over to the price. So in the price right now, for what I would be doing here is, if you want to change your price, $3,500 would be the day rate that I would charge for them here in Chicago. In New York, it would be $4,500. So you can actually just type in $4,500. You can actually change that day rate. Hit the tab key. It will do all the math for you. It's going to take you over to one more spot over here for notes. Now, in most cases, I do not put a lot of notes in this spreadsheet right here. I will add the notes later on in my estimate part, but I won't do it here. So what this gets them is 1 usage. It doesn't get them both. So the creative fee usually covers 1 usage. So if a client is hiring you and it's only 1, so let's say in this case, they were not going to do catalog and advertising, they were just going to do catalog, then this would be it. I wouldn't be billing them anything more. But because there is the advertising usage is tacked onto this, then I get this same thing again. Does that make sense to everyone? So to do that, if you scroll down to the bottom of that spreadsheet, you will see at the very bottom, there is a list of unnamed expenses. This is where you would add that additional usage. So go all the way down, click on unnamed expense, and you put in second usage or additional usage. And it ends up being the same thing, 5 at 4,500, and it will do the math for you. Now, there is a strategy to doing this as well. If you look at these two, you can see that it is $22,500. I can do one of 2 things. I can either go back up to my photo fee and just say it's $45,000, or I can break it apart like this, which doesn't make it look as bad as it would to a client. They are seeing 2 entries that are $22,500 each, as opposed to 1 entry that's 45 grand. Now, it's not going to change the cost of this estimate at all, but it merely makes it more palatable. It makes it look better. Are we good on this part? Okay. So then we're going to start to go through things really pretty quickly. I'm going to spend just a little bit more time to get down through a little bit of this. Then we'll stop because we need to figure out model fees and model rates. We need to have that conversation. And then we also need to figure out gear, which I think we can probably get to pretty quickly. So, but I want to get through just a little bit more of this until we get to model rates. So if we go back, in terms of, I'm going to go to my prep fee right now. So I'm back up to the top. And I'm going to ask you to please do this with me. You will notice that my prep fee is not anywhere near what my photographic fee is. And the reason that is that most prep days, travel days, and casting days are actually half the rate of what you would charge to actually do the photographic shooting, because they're really more, people are not really getting anything out of it. I mean, you're getting time to set up and that kind of stuff. So I would definitely do one prep day on this. That would be my lighting day. So I simply put in a 1 for the prep and then just hit the tab key until you come back around to casting. Again, in this, I'm not going to do any casting, so you can continue to go through that. If I am shooting this in New York, I could actually bill for travel days, but that would imply then I don't live in New York and I wouldn't do that, so there aren't going to be any travel days as well. If you hit, then you can actually just use your mouse to come down to assistants. How many assistants would you guys use on a job like this? Catalog in a studio, seamless. Minimum of 2, absolutely. So in order to do the math here, you can actually figure it out in your own mind. So a lot of people will just use a calculator right next to it. So for my assistants, I'm going to use 2 of them, and I'm going to do them for 6 days because I need the shooting days, and I also need the prep day, right? Do I need a strike day? I would have to figure that out. If I'm doing a really big set and not just seamless, I'm going to need a post day for them. Maybe not for me, but for the assistants to actually tear things down. If I'm on location and I'm actually shipping gear, I'm going to have assistants working for me after the job is over and after I've left town. So you need to figure this out. This is what we call work on paper. You've got to do the job on paper. So in my case, you can figure it out on a calculator. I've got 2 assistants times 6 days equals 12. So you could put in 12 here, or you can actually do the calculation inside the cell by itself. So if you want to do it inside the cell by itself, you simply put in an equal sign, and then you do 6, and then a times sign, 2, and hit enter, and it will do the calculating for you. So you can do it either, if you can't remember doing formulas in Excel, there's no problem about that. Just do it on a calculator to figure out how many assistant days you've got, and you simply put it in. I am going to use hair and makeup on this, so I'm going to put in 6 for this. If you then hit the tab key on that 6, you will notice that there is, it comes over to the amount that says 960. If you look at the formula up in the formula bar up at the very top, you will see that it says 800 times 1.2. Anybody have any idea why that is what that is?
Because the only way agents make money is through their talent, so you have to charge them more.
Well, and then,
more money.
I'm sorry. So basically, are you saying that's the agency fee?
Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly what it is. So this is a problem that you're going to run into all the time, is that every time you call somebody to get a quote for talent, they will give you a quote. So you call for models, you call for stylists, you call for hair and makeup, you call for whatever, any of that stuff. They will actually give you a quote, but what they quote you is the day rate for that person. They do not quote that day rate plus the agency fee. Standard agency fee for most talent in the United States anyway is 20% on top. So whatever they quote you is, you multiply that times 1.2 and you get the agency fee added in. And that's something you definitely want to do, because otherwise your bid doesn't have it, you're going to eat it. It means, oh, well, you told me it was only 800 a day. And I said, well, that's what the agency told me. They didn't tell me they were going to charge the 20% on top of it. So, but I'm going to do this in New York. And to be honest with you, you can't get a hair and makeup person in New York for $800. So you need to change that 800 to 1200. And then simply hit the enter key and it will do the calculating for you. I'm not going to do separate hair and makeup. I'm going to come down to do styling. So for the styling, it's the same thing. However, I need I take that back. My hair and makeup, I only need 5 days. I put in 6. I'm going to go down to stylist now. And in my stylist, I actually need them for more. So the styling, I am going to need them for the prep day at least to start getting clothes in, get them checked in, and get stuff to at least beginning to get it steamed out and ready to actually shoot. And I'm going to need a post day because we're shooting through the final day. Somebody's got to be there to pack all that shit up and get it back to wherever it actually came from. So the stylist is actually going to go in at 7 days. And again, I'm going to come over here. This is the 750 here would be based on Chicago rates, not New York. So I'm going to change that 750 to 1,000 a day. And again, times that agency fee. The stylist assistant, she is going to get the same 7 days. $300 in Chicago would be fine, but it's going to be more like 4 in New York. So you can simply change those numbers. It'll redo the whole thing. If you're using a production coordinator, the rule of thumb for a production coordinator is the number of times. What a production coordinator does is that they're the person who actually they will book the talent, they'll book hotel rooms, they will book flights. If you're doing flights, they book the studio, they make arrangements for lunch, they sit at the shoot and they make sure that models are on time. If they're not, they're the people who troubleshoot that. They're the people who, they organize everything. The rule of thumb, it's a general rule, but it's a good one to use for an estimate, is that for every shooting day, there's 2 days of production. So in this case, we've got 5 shooting days. The producer on this would actually get 10 days because they need to do a lot of the work up in the beginning part. And again, 750, I can probably get an okay producer, but I'm going to bump this to 1,000. That's probably closer. Digital tech, we go back here. Again, 6 days for digital tech, my 5 days of shooting. And you can see how this ultimately is beginning to come up. This is why you can't, so don't even look down here at the bottom. Can anybody give me any idea, I guess right now, where we're at money-wise? Right now I'm at $82,850 and I haven't even begun to get talent in there yet. This is why you do not give somebody a ballpark figure on the phone. Make sense? Okay. I'm going to say it's 5 minutes after 10. Let's take a quick 15-minute break. Go grab a cup of coffee. We're going to come back and we're going to finish this whole part up. I feel like we're in a good place right here. And then, like I say, we'll spend the rest of the time shooting. Are you guys good on this? Okay, I'm going to pause the recording, but I'm going to leave the room open. That in many cases, this is like, okay, how much more boring can this possibly be? And I can't begin to tell you how many times I have had people, this just happened to me yesterday. I got an email from a student who graduated last semester, and she was asked to actually do a bid, and she said, you know, I know we went over all of this in class, whatever, and I'm sorry, I really should have paid a whole lot more attention to that than I did. Can you please help me out with this bid now? This is the money part of it all, and at the end of the day, this is the single most important part. I know I asked this question all along, and we don't really have time to get into the bigger debate about it now, but what is the single most important thing in your business, in your career, in your photography? And I get all sorts of different answers. People say, oh, it's my work. And people say, oh, it's my lifestyle and all that kind of stuff, whatever. And at the end of the day, it is the money. Because if you cannot make enough money doing this, you will stop doing it unless you've got some patron or somebody, you know, who's going to support you and all of that kind of stuff. Anyway, so in the end, this stuff does become really, really, really critical. It's what makes the difference between being able to do it and not. So at any rate, back to where we were on our estimate guy, and hopefully you guys are actually, even if you're, you know, I'm hoping at the very least you're filling in the numbers with me. So digital production charges. Now, typically what this is it is In the old days, when we would shoot film, you actually were able to mark film up. So you would buy a roll of film for $5 and you would charge a client 15 for it. And you could make, it was just another profit center for us. We could make a lot. That went away with digital. And digital, there is no physical exchange of that part. However, your wear and tear on your gear, on your camera gear, that kind of stuff does matter. And so you need to put in essentially charges that will allow you to recover the cost of the wear and tear that's on your camera. It's just something that we put in to bill to clients. But there's another thing about this that it becomes important right here. And again, it's just a strategy that you need to be aware of when you're thinking about doing estimates. And again, this is sort of like negotiation 101. But you never, ever, ever go in a negotiation and ask for your bottom line. You never go in and ask for the least amount of money. You always go in and you ask high and be willing to bargain down to a lower rate. If you go in and you give them your absolute bottom cheapest rate to do it, you have no room to negotiate down. And everybody in the world is going to want to negotiate down. Typical rule of thumb, the way negotiations work is, and this will work on this works for everybody. This will work for you as giving somebody a starting number, or for you as somebody who is trying to negotiate a starting number. But the basic rule of thumb that goes is this: whoever sets the first price, the number that first comes in, the counter offer is always 20% less. And then ultimately people negotiate into the middle and you end up with it being 10% less. So if I'm bidding a job and somebody's asking me to bid a job and I give them $100,000, I know that they are going to counter at $80,000 and I'm hoping we settle on $90,000. So in the back of my mind, I need to actually put in that extra $10,000 because the figure that I really want is 90 grand. But if I give them 90 grand, then they're going to counter and say 72, and then we're going to settle on 86. I mean, it just, so anyway, you need to build stuff into it. And this is one of the places that you can do it. Digital production charges. And again, this used to be what we would call the markup on film. So the way we usually figure this is $25 a shot. So in this 2-week shooting that I'm going to do, I'm going to figure we're doing 12 shots a day times 5 days. So that would be 60 digital production charges. And you can see I've already now got a $1,500 cost that is baked in that I could take out and never, ever, ever touch my rate. Now, if they pay for it, that's great because I only make the extra $1,500. But if I need room to negotiate out or drop the money down, you don't ever want to touch your rate. That is the last thing that you touch. So this is another thing you got to write down right now. Never touch your rate. If you do, if you go in here and you say, okay, this is my rate, I'm at $4,500 a day, and all of a sudden they say, well, you've got to drop your rate, whatever, and you go, okay, I'm at $3,500 a day, you just telegraphed to them that you're not confident about your rate, you're not confident about the level that you came in at. You only undermine yourself. You may get that job, but you won't get the next one because people will not believe that you are the photographer that you think. If you don't believe in yourself, nobody else is going to believe in you as well. So you never touch your rate. What you would do instead, again, you do things like this, you start to build in charges like this that you know you can take out. But if they say that they need to drop the bid even further, and then that will always happen, then you say to them, well, maybe we need to shoot one less day. Or maybe you can't afford the $10,000 a day model. Maybe you need to cut it down to the $5,000 a day model. Or maybe we don't shoot this, we don't take this to Florida and shoot it there. We actually stay here in New York and we do it here. Maybe we don't shoot it in Manhattan. Maybe we take it out onto Long Island City. The studios out there are cheaper. I mean, there's a gazillion ways that you can negotiate stuff down, but your rate is not one of them. Do not do that. If they insist on less time for you to, and it ultimately is time, but you talk about it as your photo fee, not as time. You just say, okay, well, this is where we need to cut back. This is where we need to cut back. This is where we need to cut back. Anyway, so part of this is insurance in that. we're not going to do any retouching fees on that. I'm not going to do any post on this. I'm not doing any post-production. Hard drive delivery, it's how most people actually deliver files. So I'm going to put in 1 for that. Again, if you're doing a 5-day shoot, some people will have stuff being uploaded to servers at night. Some people will, but a lot of times, especially if you're shooting on location, you're delivering this stuff by hard drive. So anyway, I simply put that in. There is no film and processing. I'm simply going down through that. But the model fees. So we've got 2 things that we're going to have to calculate. And other than that, we're getting very close to the end of this. So in figuring out the model fees, we need to actually do the shoot on paper. Now, this is, again, a lot of you guys have been with me and have seen me do this exact same example before, but for those of you who haven't, I need you to open up another of the Excel spreadsheets that is on our Canvas site, and it's the one that says timesheet per 30 minute. So if you click on that and just say, download it, save it, and you open it up, what you'll actually see is a way to plan out a day. So if you're looking at my screen, you'll see a bigger version of it. So here is the trick to figuring out days, because when people first start doing this, and realize this is, I'm basing this on a fashion shooting because that's what I do, but this easily adapts to doing a food shoot, or to doing a car shoot, or to doing a real estate shoot, or whatever it is you're doing. You can adapt this same idea to that in terms of figuring out your crew, the timing, everything else, blah, blah, blah. All right, so the trick to figuring out a day is you've got to figure out there's one person that's got to be involved in every single aspect of the day, and it's you. It's the photographer. So the way you lay out your day is based on the photographer. Do not start with the models and hair and makeup. That won't make any difference. It's all about you. And so that's how we're going to figure this out. So for me, in looking at this, I am going to say to myself, okay, typically for photo crew, a typical day is 10 hours. This is true in Chicago, Miami, New York, and LA. It's just, that's what it is. So that would apply to photographer, assistant, digital tech, styling assistant, photo assistants, the crew. Models are an 8-hour day. They are not a 10-hour day. Don't ask me how we lost that battle, but we did. So I'm going to figure this on a 12-hour day for me. So I'm going to start, again, laying out the day based on me and then plug everybody else into me. So I said I was going to do a 12-shot day, which is what I'm going to do. But again, I'm going to start on my, if you want to fill out your worksheet right now, you can. Otherwise, just come look at mine right here, because I'll show you basically how I'm going to do it. So I'm going to start out, typical day for me would start at 8 o'clock, and I'm just going to do setup. And my setup, even though I've had a prep day, I'm going to come in, I want 2 hours in the morning to get things going. Now, if I'm doing a really super simple setup, I might, again, I've got a prep day that's already built into this. That prep day is another place that I can actually sacrifice out. I can get rid of that prep day, which will not only drop the fee that I collect. Again, I'm not cutting my creative fee down. It's just the prep day. That also kills the 1 day of the studio rental. That kills 1 day for the digital tech. And that kills 1 day for each of 2 assistants. Those are also areas that I can then negotiate back out. It's not impacting my rate so much. I mean, again, I'm losing the fee for the prep day, but again, I'm keeping my eye on the prize. The $45,000 creative fee is what I'm keeping my eye on. So again, but I'm still would go in the morning, got to get lights up, got to make sure everything's running, cameras are syncing, the whole 9 yards. So I'm going to do set for the first 2 hours. And then again, I need to be ready to do my shot number 1. So I'm going to do shot number 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, and then 6. So I'm going to try to get my first 6 shots off before 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Then I need time for lunch. So I'm going to do lunch for an hour. Again, if I don't need the hour, that would be great. Let me do you guys get where well, here.
Hey, Verser.
Yeah.
You know you're not sharing your screen.
Oh, no, I did. The minute you said, hey, Verser, I realized that was probably the case.
Okay. I just
Sorry. No, thank you.
I
Thank you.
look
Thank
at my
you. No.
screen. Yeah.
Okay, so here I am on my set again. I'm going to start this all from the beginning. Okay, so, and just do it with caps. So again, I'm figuring time based on me first. So again, it's set, shot 1, oh, sorry, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Then I've got an hour for lunch. And then I do shot 7, 8, 9, 10, 10, 11, 12. So 8 to 5, and then basically I've got strike at the end of the day. So on my final day, I've either got strike time here to get out, or I'm going to book another day for my assistants to come in and strike the set on that day. But so I'm simply going to put in S's again for this. And that is my 10-hour day. So I can base everything else on this. So then when it comes to the models, again, I am going to alternate models throughout the day. So I'm going to do, this model is actually going to be also doing shot number 1. So I'm going to put an X here for her. She's also going to do every other shot. So she's here, she's here. She's doing all the odd ones. And then the other person, my model number 2, has got to do the other shots, the even ones. So then I need to figure out time to do hair and makeup. So hair and makeup typically, certainly in New York, takes forever. They would give an hour for each one of those. In Chicago, it's a little bit different. In Chicago, they would expect hair and makeup and getting the girl really dressed in the beginning probably to take an hour and a half. So that's basically what I'll put into here. So this is going to be getting, this girl's going to be getting dressed here. She's going to have her hair done here and her makeup done here. But I run into a problem now because I've only got a single hair and makeup artist right here. So in my model number 2, she can get dressed here, however, and she can get her hair done here. But the problem that I have is she cannot get her makeup done here because this girl is, because that hair and makeup artist is going to be doing this person's hair. So in order to make this work, I have got to actually shift this girl, our first girl, back. So hair and makeup here, she sits on her ass here while the makeup is actually starting here. And then again, typically I would get her dressed, to be honest with you, here, and then I would have her out on set to tune in my lighting. That's how this whole thing would actually work out. But you can see that without doing this on paper, if you simply said, okay, I'm going to do 8 hours a day, 2 models, 16 model hours total, you don't really know that this is going to happen, because now if we look at our start and stop times, this model number 1, because of everything that we've got going here, has to actually be there at 8 o'clock, and she stays till 4:30. And so if my start time here is 8, my end time is 4:30. Sorry. And so that total time here is 8.5 hours. That is an hour, a half hour of overtime. And so again, this is why I keep saying to you, you cannot do this off the top of your head, because without actually laying out what my day looks like on paper, I'm not going to know that I actually have a half hour of overtime on one of the girls in here. So in terms of my second girl, she's going to be there at 9. And she's there until 5 o'clock. And that is a normal 8-hour day. So my total per day is 16.5 hours. However, that half hour is overtime and it pays at double rate. So the truth of it is, it's actually 9 hours total. Does that make sense to everyone, what I just did? So this, instead of trying to figure out something weird here, it's just because she gets double time for the extra half hour. In all honesty, turns out to be 9 hours. So if it's 9 hours here plus the 8 hours here, I've got 17 hours of model time per day. Make sense? So I'm going to go back to my other calculator. And in this calculator right here, what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to do it as an equation inside this, but you could do it on a calculator. I'm going to do equals 17 times, again, that was 17 hours for each day times my 5 days. So that's the number of hours that I'm actually going to do it. However, in terms of the rate for the models, again, in New York, I'm going to use a person who's 5,000 a day. So I'm just going to do 5,000 divided by 8 is $625 an hour. So that's what I'm going to plug into here is 625. Again, it's still times that 1.2 because of the agency fee in there. And so you can see I've got $63,750 worth of modeling fees in here. If I had not done that part on paper, if I hadn't done that whole part that we were actually laying out, I would have been off 5 hours total for that overtime, that little half hour of overtime over the course of the entire week. If I had missed that just by saying, oh yeah, 2 girls, 8 hours a day, yeah, that's what it's going to be, blah, 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 blah. What would it end up, the mistake that I would have made is 5 times 625. I would have been $3,125 off on my model fees. And I would have to eat that. Yeah. So again, I cannot stress how important doing this stuff actually is. We're not going to have any minors. We're not going to have any fittings. We're not going to do any travel. For catering in here, basically the way this works out, you can see I've got $15 for breakfast and $25 for lunch per person. So we need to count up the number of people in our crew. So the crew is photographer, 2 models, 2 assistants, a stylist assistant, a creative director at the very least. So I've got a minimum of 8 that are in here. Have I missed anybody? I think I've got it right. So in this case, it would be, this is a per person cost, 8 times 5, again, 5 days for shooting, it would actually be 40. Is there a mistake I have just made in this? Anyone?
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
I figured out that I'm trying to figure out catering, and all shootings do breakfast and lunch. Nobody does dinner unless you're going really late, but they do breakfast and lunch. And you'll see over here in the notes, $15 for breakfast, $25 for lunch per person. So I counted up my crew. I have 8 people in my crew, and I'm shooting for 5 days. So I put 8 times 5 is 40. So I put 40 in here and immediately ask you guys, is there a mistake in this? What about my prep day? I didn't put in for my prep day, did I? This is the shit that will burn you. And if you make enough of these mistakes, you'll make no money. So again, for my prep day, I had both digital techs. I had myself. I'm sorry, both assistants, myself, the digital tech, the stylist, and the stylist assistant. So I've actually got 6 more. So this is actually 46, not 40. Believe it or not, it's really funny. I just leave this in because I think it's cute. Cell phone. There was a time where we could actually, cell phones were so new, you could charge for them. And we would actually rent them. We would rent like lots of them. And they sort of worked as walkie-talkies and shit. It's so, anyway, I'm loath to take that out, but at a certain stage of the game, I'm going to have to. Okay, studio expendables. What the hell are studio expendables?
Padding.
Say what?
Padding.
Yep. You've been with me. Michaela, how many times have you gone through this with me? At least
3.
twice.
Yeah.
Yeah. 3rd time's the charm. But anyway, no, so it's for things like gaffer's tape, that kind of stuff, you know, it's just, it's sort of you know, non-describable. So I simply put in, and again, depending on the length of your shoot, on a typical 1-day shoot, I would put in 150 bucks, 2-day shoot. But for this one, a 5-day shoot, I'm going to put in 250, and I'm going to do the same thing for miscellaneous. And if somebody were to ask me the difference between the two, I would say, you know, miscellaneous covers the, oh, all of a sudden you need flowers, and we've got to get a delivery service to bring the flowers to the photo studio. It's to cover things like that. So you make those distinctions. But again, these are exactly what Michaela was just saying. These are two areas right here that I can then turn right around and take back out in my negotiation to get this job down if I have to. So messengers and freight, all of a sudden you would have to figure out all this, who's getting clothes to the studio, who's getting it back, who's paying for that, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to blow through all of that. Studio backgrounds, again, we would go through, you know, all of this. It's going to be 2 backgrounds. I'm going to do it every single day. So I typically always bid the 100-yard rolls of seamless, which is about $300. So I'm going to actually put in $500 for this. So we'll do 2 backgrounds at $500. I'm going to try to make a little bit of money on that. I don't need set builders. I'm not doing any location stuff. We're not doing any wardrobe or wardrobe purchase. That would all be more for advertising. Props we could actually do, but I'm going to keep props out of this. Special equipment rental. This is where you need to open up the last of the spreadsheets that I ask you to download. And it is this equipment rental version 2004. If you can actually click on that and download it, it's the final thing that we're going to go through. And then we will move on. And I'll download it to there. So this becomes the last of the ones that are really and critically important for us to go over. So it is this equipment rental one. The problem that we run into in equipment rentals nowadays is that nobody wants to actually publish their prices. I don't know if you guys have tried to find out how much equipment rental is anymore, but everybody wants to negotiate it in person. So it used to be you could go to Trek, which was one of the big rental houses in New York. You could go, there's a bunch of them there, whatever, and they publish their prices, and you can actually run a calculator, very much like we're doing this one right here, and then it would just come up with a cost for you, and you would just submit your order. Nobody will do that anymore. Everybody is trying to negotiate and jockey prices, so nobody wants to actually publish their prices. The prices that I'm showing you here are prices that actually did exist in 2014. My guess is that they haven't changed a whole lot because there's been a lot of downward pressure on the price of doing photography right now. So I would trust these prices right now, is I guess what I'm saying. In 5 years, who knows? If the business gets a whole lot better, they actually may need to be adjusted. But what will happen here, if you take a look at yours, I'm going to ask you to please open yours up to actually look at it, because this part matters, and it's a little bit, can be a little bit confusing here as well. So what this calculator is designed to do is to give you a checklist, number one, to help you think about all the stuff that you actually do need to do a photo shoot. And number two, figure out whether you want to do a markup on the rental gear or not. Now, in my opinion, doing a markup, at least in the beginning, makes a lot of sense. Because that, number one, if you're successful and the client will actually pay you the markup on it, then you get to keep the extra money. Again, it's another profit center. However, this also is padding. This is another place where you can pull the markup off to reduce your overall bid, which then again gives you room to negotiate without you taking the hit. Does this make sense to everyone? We good on this? So, number of days, you need to enter that up at the very top. And this is the tricky part about doing rentals. So the way the photography rental industry works, and this is true for film as well. So if you're renting from the film houses, it'll work the same way. What they do is they charge per day for the first 3 days. Then 3 days, whatever you end up with at 3 days actually equals a week. So let's say that you're renting a camera and it's $100 a day. If you rent it for 1 day, it's $100. 2 days, it's $200. 3 days, it's $300. The 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th day, it's still only $300. When you hit that 3rd day, that is the price for a week rental. When you go to the 8th day, the countdown starts again. So again, on our same camera analogy, 1 day rental for a camera, $100, 2 days, $200, 3 days, $300, 4 days, $300, 5 days, $300, 6 days, $300, 7 days, $300, 8 days is now $400, 9 days is $500, 10 days is $600. Doing this in my head is really hard. 7 days, 11 days is still, again, you still go into that 3-day rental. Does that make sense to everybody what's going on here? So let's say that I'm going to have this camera, or I'm going to rent this gear again. If I go back to my shooting situation, I've got 1 day of prep, and I've got 1 day of prep, and I've got 5 days of shooting. That's 6 days total. However, you do not put in 6 days for this, because a 3-day rental will cover all of those 6 days. So the number of days that you would put in here would be 3, not 6. Markup. Standard markup for gear is 17%. Anything more than this, you seem like you're gouging somebody. If you put in 25% here, people will flinch at that. 17 is a weird number. It's a prime number, but it's just people, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I understand that, you know, even though they don't. It's about the max that you're going to be able to get away with. If you feel like, okay, well, that seems a little bit steep, you can change the percentage here too. So you could change it to 10% if you wanted to. If you feel like you can get away with it, bump it to 20%, whatever. You can put the figure in there that you actually want. And then it's just a question here of changing whatever the number of units is of gear that you actually want to do. All the rest of this will be calculated for you. So typically for me, a typical situation in a studio for me is I do 4 2400 power packs and 8 heads. That's a typical setup for me. So in this first Pro Photo setup, you can see right here is a power pack with 2 heads. So I'm going to put in 4 kits of that. So then you can see over here, the cost per day is $110 per day per kit. The total of that without markup would be $1,320. The total with the 17% markup would be $1,544. And then we simply go straight on down the line, and you can see, I'm going to add another couple of things in here just to give you some, you know, idea of what's going on. In spot grid sets, I do 4 of those. If I can come down here, Octabank, I would do 1 of those. Umbrellas, I'll do 4 umbrellas. Pocket Wizard slave sets, I'm going to do 4 sets of that. Actually, I'm going to do 5 sets of that because I need 1 for a camera. C-stands, 20 C-stands would make sense to me. And you can keep going on and on and on down like this. Once you get all of that done, you'll see down here that you will actually have, again, we also build in, do you need this stuff delivered to the studio, or are you renting from an external renting house and bringing it in? There is tax, even if you're tax exempt in either New York, LA, or Miami, or Chicago, the tax on rental gear is different than sales tax. So it would be a standard here at any rate. And do you need it delivered and picked up, all that. So anyway, what we come up with is $2,921, or if I do the markup, $3,418. This only got us through lighting. You need to do the same thing for cameras right here. And then if you're doing location work, again, outside work, this is the gear that you would use for outside work. And then are you adding expendables here? And this is, I would add expendables here, even though they should be covered in studio expenses. I'm going to start to pad again here in both places. So this will get you through that. Are you renting a van to actually, you know, take this on location, go somewhere with this, blah, 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 blah. So this will actually get you through all of that. And this is the figure then that you would use for your special rental equipment back on your invoice calculator. This is also a really good checklist right here, a non-billable checklist that you should actually have in mind. Again, I go through checklists all the time. You know, do you need other things that you might actually need to have on your shooting? Especially, this is really critical if you're doing stuff outdoors on location. So it's just another thing for us to have. But I'm going to copy this. So the $3,418 is going to be the gear that I actually used for this job. So I simply type in a 1 here for the special rental equipment, and then 3,418. And I love the fact that it's weird numbers because everybody believes that that's actually makes it seem more sense. There's a split here between special rental equipment and digital rental equipment. And again, the reason I do that is that I don't want this to be some gigantic number. So I split the cameras out, and that's why you'll see here, digital equipment here for cameras is this second line here for digital equipment here. And you can even split lenses out and grip out and that kind of stuff. The reason you want to do that is that you don't want some monster-ass number. Look at how bad that number looks for models, $3,750. That's a gasp number. So at any rate, the studio itself, again, I'm going to do 5 days. Typical studio in New York would be $1,200 if I'm lucky, $1,500 if I'm not. Is there a problem?
Prep day.
Thank you. It's 6 days because of my prep. There is no travel motorhome. We always put in something for insurance. So I'm going to put in $50 for liability insurance and $150 for shoot insurance. Nobody really knows what that's about, but I have an insurance policy that covers my photography, my gear, and my photo shoots. It costs me $1,200 a year, and I pretty much try to recover, if not make money on it, by putting in these charges, and nobody ever balks on insurance. And so this is my total right now. So the reason that I had that, ask you to open that macro as well, if you look at the very top of this spreadsheet, you'll see it says use Command Option X to invoke the macro. And look what happens when you do that. I'm gonna hold down Command Option and hit the letter X. And what it does is it culls all of the information on the spreadsheet so that what I show them in my estimate doesn't have all of these, you know, I don't have a listing for motorhome and hotel rooms and airfares and all. I don't have any of that stuff. This culls down anything that was actually has a value or in it. It also establishes the photographic fee always at the top, even if it isn't the most expensive, because you'll see model fees are actually more expensive than that. But it breaks it down, and this is basically where we land here. So to see the impact of usage, this is the impact right here. So this is what I would actually, so it's copied, it's ready to go. I'll show you how it looks out on my stationery. So again, in my stationery, you know, you would do date, who it's going to, you would list the usage, you spell all of that shit out. But the way this ultimately looks is it would just get pasted in. If it puts it in the form of a spreadsheet, you don't want to do that. So just do a paste special and do unformatted text. And it drops it in, and you'll notice there's a couple of, it's just because of the length of it here, there's a couple of tab mistakes. So you just clean those up and put an underline here and change this to estimate. And then typically what I would do is I would go back to this and I would copy all of the categories of services that I've got here. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to go back into Word. And under this, I'll actually go to the next page. and do notes. And then again, I'll do a paste, unformatted text. And then I've got a list, and I would put in here as estimated. And again, talent 2 at 5,000 per day. Do not do that in big caps. US. And you just put in, again, any of the notes that actually need to go in to explain what's all going here. But this is the magic of usage right here. Check this out. So I am now basically looking at $45,000. However, the client comes back to me and says, you know, we actually want to use this. So we've done it for catalog. We're doing it for magazine advertising. However, we also want to do point of purchase in every one of our stores, national. So again, that becomes another media. So all of a sudden, this additional usage right here, you could separate this out. You could do this, and I probably would. I would separate this out and do advertising usage. And then for the next one down, I would do this for point of purchase.
What is point of purchase?
Whenever you go into the stores and you see anything, any of the placards that are sitting on counters, you see the pictures that are hanging up in the space, pictures that are actually in the windows of the store. All of that is point of purchase. So again, point of purchase is, if you take a look at that, the guide to bidding and estimate that I mentioned in the very beginning, they go through a lot of this. And one of them, this is what they say. They talk about fees. It's a good general thing to actually get through, but let me see if they specify. Point of sale or point of purchase are displayed in retail stores or other locations where consumers can purchase the products. Examples include in-store signs, shopping cart posters, countertop displays, leaflets, brochures, and catalogs distributed in the retail outlet. That would be different than mail. So that's basically what it is. But look what this actually does to my fees. So again, that's another 5 at 4,500. And now all of a sudden, my fee is almost 70 grand. I'm not shooting any longer. I'm still doing a 5-day shooting. But then they come along and they say, well, this is just way too high. Oh, and if you run the calculator again, you don't have to do anything else. Just, again, Option Command X, and it'll run the calculator again, and it'll figure out your second, it'll put your second usage in there. So then they come back to you and they say, well, you know, we need to knock $50,000 off of this, whatever. And I'll say, okay, well, that's fine. You need to lose one of your usages here. You need to actually kill your point of purchase usage here. That'll get us $2,300. I mean, $23,000 out of it. And we've got some other work to do. Okay, the models we actually have got to. They're not going to be $5,000 a day models. They're going to be $3,000 a day models. And then you just keep going on. Is this making sense? And this is the game. Please promise me you will never, ever, ever give somebody a ballpark figure. Because I think when I first mentioned this to you guys right here, nobody had an idea that this was going to be a $200,000 job, would be a guess. All right. Are there any questions about any of this?
So would you give, so like once you give this to whoever, you give that money then to the producer to do all this then?
No, absolutely not. So that's a great question, and it's something that you need to think about. And I've told this story before. There are, for the most part, so let's say I put this bid in and they accept it. And then it comes my job to actually get this thing in motion. At that stage of the game, what's paramount to you is, and I tell everybody this, getting money before the shooting is vastly easier than getting it after the shooting. So if they were to okay this, my first thing would be, we need to establish who's carrying the expenses on this. Am I going to carry it? Am I going to carry the studio rental? Am I going to carry the model fees? Am I going to do all of that? If they expect me to carry the model fees, I'm going to bump that model fee by 10%. So we were at $63,000 for the model fees. I'm going to want $6,300 to actually carry that expense if they want me to handle that. Same thing on the studio. So if they agree to that, then that's great. Because the real trick to this is that then you want to get an advance on all of this. Now, there's a number of different strategies for advances. I'm going to tell you the one that is the best. It's not always the one that you're going to get, but it's the best one to get. The thing that you always try for in an advance is 100% of the expenses and 50% of your fee. That's what you're looking for. That will get you the most amount of money. Some people will give you half of the job. So in this case, it would be $90,000. Problem is $90,000 doesn't cover all of my expenses. My cost in this, the photo fee that I'm going to get out of this right now is $67,500. So that 90 grand is not going to, that means I'm going to be short $20,000, $30,000 if they only give me half of this. Some of them will give you 100% of the expenses. Fine. I think they should actually pony up a little bit more than that. Sometimes, depending on how it works out, some people will try to say, I'll give you half of your fee. I mean, again, the most money that you're ever going to get, because they're never going to give you 100% of your fee, but get 100% of the expenses and half your fee. That's what you're always looking for. And if they do that, hell yes, I'll carry it all, because not only did I mark it up and they're making that extra $6,300 on the model fees, but they're giving me the money up front. So I'm not carrying anything. There's no cash flow issue here. I'm not carrying anything. It also is a commitment to them. So I'm telling you, it's much easier to get the money up front than it is, because once you do the job and they have the film or they have the images, it's going to be, verse or who. Make sense?
So then once you get the money, is it the photographer's job to then reach out to the modeling agency and everything? Or
No,
would
that's
that be
what the production coordinator does. It's your job to
Okay.
reach out to the production coordinator, and you put her in touch with the client, and they have that conversation. Rarely anymore, it used to be different, but rarely anymore is the photographer directly involved in casting talent in, I'll say, I want to work in this studio. Can you check on its availability? And they may ask you for recommendations for models, that kind of stuff. Sometimes I'll put that in, but most often now, that's all negotiation that's going on between an ad agency and a client, or if it's more retail, they have a really strong, it's an art director and a creative director making those calls. They may ask me what I think, but rarely does that happen anymore. Does this all make sense? Are there any other questions about this? So I know this is long, I know this is somewhat drawn out, whatever, but all of this is just so incredibly important. I mean, the business aspect of it, you just can't ignore that. So anyway, we've gotten through this. I want to go through one last thing really quickly with you guys, and then we really do, if you have time and you want to shoot, I understand it's getting a little bit of a late start for the class itself, but I'm certainly here, more than willing to talk about anything that you want to talk about. I don't need to do any of this. I don't need to do that. Self-promo, that's what I would like to talk about really quickly here. And you can actually look at this with me. So also in that session 4, there is self-promotion PDF. And if we actually click on that, we can take a look at it really quickly. You can pretty much read this for yourself. I just want to talk about a couple of things about it. I'm not going to go through this in its entirety. You can read why you're supposed to be doing it, your purpose of the whole thing, a whole 9 yards, whatever. Again, this part actually does sort of make sense. that you do need promotion. There's no way of getting around this. You need electronic promotion, e-blasting, that kind of stuff, but you also need printed promotion. I'm a big believer in that. It's interesting. I've gone from both extremes. When I first started out, there was no internet, so everything was printed promotion. And then when email and that kind of stuff became available, everybody thought, oh, this is great. I'm just going to move to that. And so everybody did that. But you guys all know the consequence of that. We're just inundated with email promotions and that. How much of that shit do you look at? So everybody blows that off. So it's funny. It's sort of like swung back. The pendulum has gone back the other direction, and people are now going back to doing printed promotional pieces. So anyway, a mix of both is what I would suggest doing, but you need to be disciplined about your promotion. The one thing you cannot do this, is do not think about your promotion as a one-time hit. That's not how it works. Promotion, you need to be thinking about it as a sustained campaign. How often do you do it? But it's got to be on a regular basis. My suggestion for specifically whether you're, and it's both. So in doing your promotion, you should be hitting people up at least 3 to 4 times a year. I wouldn't do a whole lot more than that, because then you're just, people are just, they get angry at you. They're like, okay, I wish they would leave me alone, take me off your list, I can't, blah, 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 blah. So, but that should be printed as well as doing electronic email promotion. Now, you can stagger them. So say the odd months that you do would be physical mail. The even months that you would do would be email, that kind of stuff. I mean, you can mix it up, but the trick to this is that it's got to be consistent. So when you budget for this, depending on what you think you can do, that needs to be taken into account. So you don't want to blow all of it on one great, amazing, incredible email piece or printed piece, and then have no money left to actually back it up through the year. So the way I started my original, when I was doing the very first beginning of my career, I printed out postcards. That's what I did. It was a single postcard. I didn't put it in an envelope. Postcards are less to mail than a letter was to mail. And I actually printed the stuff out in a darkroom. And then on the back, I put a stamp on it, and I had a mailing list with labels that I could just put on it. And I would do one of those every 3 months. And I did that for years. And I sent it to the same people, and it just built and built and built and built and built. And it actually worked out. It was a really successful way to actually do it. As down and dirty and as cheap as you can possibly get it. And that's how I would start if I were you. Typically what I would do, and again, if you come to my screen, I'll show you how I would set it up real fast. Actually, this is actually one of Stefano's pieces, so I'm just going to use his to actually do this with. To print your own pieces, I typically use, if I was to do this right now, sort of in where I see you guys being positioned right now, it's not only a promotional piece to actually mail out, but it would also be something to do as a leave behind, because that's another thing. If you're managed to actually get in front of somebody, you want to be able to leave them with something. If you can't get in front of somebody, then dropping off portfolios is accepted all over the place. So you would want to, again, do your leave behinds in your portfolio. So, and I used to do this all the time, and it's just a trick, and you guys should know this. Typically with my leave behinds, I'll do 2 or 3 different sets of images, and then I will put, so let's say I've got, I don't know, I've got a studio piece, a beauty piece, and a location piece. So those 3 things, whatever. I will do a set of each of those as a leave behind, and I'll count them out. I will do 5 of them, of each of them, and I will put those into my portfolio if I have to do a portfolio drop-off. When I go to pick my portfolio back up, I immediately look to see if anybody kept any of the leave behinds. 2 things it'll tell you. Number 1, if nobody has kept one of your leave behinds, they're not interested in your work, and that's information that you need to know. Number 2, if somebody has kept a leave behind, they are interested in your work. That's also important to know, but then also which of the ones they actually kept. because then you have some clue about the work that you do and what they're actually interested in, so that you know the next time you drop off a book or you put together a portfolio for them, you gear that work to the leave behind that they actually kept. Does that sort of make sense? Oh, so I see they kept the really weird, gel lighting beauty shot that I did. So clearly that's something that interested them. And so that's what I'm going to do. In your leave behinds, the way that I think about leave behinds is, or promotional pieces for that matter, is they should be artwork. You should be thinking, I want this person to thumbtack this to the inside of their little cubicle and keep it up as a piece of art. And as a consequence, you do not put your contact information or your name or anything on the front of your promo piece. It all goes on the back side of your promo piece, because otherwise you're asking somebody to stick an ad up on their little office cubicle as opposed to a piece of art. You do want your information connected to it, but you put it on the back side so that if somebody goes, wow, I've been looking at this thing for 6 months now and I really love it, I'm going to call this person and see if I can't get them in. And all of your contact information is on the back. Does that sort of make sense? All right. So if I was going to do this as a promotional piece, the way that I would do this is I'm simply going to create a new file. And again, I would do them, typically I'll do them full bleed. So I'll print them full bleed. So I know I can do an 8.5 by 11. And actually, I'm going to do this as a horizontal. And again, you would print this at 300 PPI. I'm going to go ahead and leave it as a white background and say OK to that. And so this is going to be the size of my promo piece. Just make sure that this really is in inches. 11, 8.5. Yep. And then I'm simply going to cut this in half. So I'm going to drag this out. And what you end up with is basically an 8.5 by 5.5, 11, 5.5, yeah, 8.5 by 5.5. And then I would take this image and bring it over and scale it. And that looks good to me. And then I would copy it. Oh, come on, work. Sorry, I'm just wanting to mask this out, so it just makes it simpler for me. And then I'm going to duplicate the. It's weird what quits working on my screen. And we'll invert this. And I print those out and cut them apart, and I end up with 2 leave behinds. And I do double-sided paper, print my name and stuff on the backside. And again, you can do, 5 sheets of paper will give you 10 leave behinds. Do 3 different images and you are good to go. So that's actually what I would do. As time went on, and I could spend more money, I started doing this. I'm going to stop sharing my screen really quickly. So yeah, you guys can see this part right here. So I started doing these small hand printed portfolios. So this was one, actually they started out like this. And I was really into making, again, I wanted something that people would keep. So it became sort of an art piece, but again, I ended up tearing up pages. I did a bunch of stuff, but I also sealed this with string and sealing wax so that you couldn't see what was inside without destroying it. You had to pull it apart to actually get it to look at it. And part of that had to do with, again, promo strategies. Part of it had to do with involvement. There's something that I gave them that they had to be involved with to actually do. So involvement is something that matters. You need to think about that. Weight is something that matters. People get a ton of shit in the mail. The heavier it is, the more likely they are to open it. If you send somebody something in an envelope, again, people, and I know you guys do the same thing. You get a lot of junk mail and you just throw it into the garbage. You don't even bother to open it, right? So in order to make sure that your image is seen, you use clear envelopes. If you're going to put something in an envelope, if I was going to put one of those things in an envelope, typically, if I was going to send that out, I would simply send it out as a postcard. I'd put a stamp on the back and just send it through the mail and see what happened. If I wanted to put it in an envelope, though, I would get a clear plastic envelope so that they had to see the image. They may just throw it away, but at least they would see the image without ever having to open the envelope. Again, weight matters, involvement matters. Prizes matter. I know people who put lottery tickets inside of their promos because, again, it all of a sudden, if somebody bothers to open up your promo, so Ellie, you're sending me promos and you're sending me one every month, right? And I'm like, fuck this. I'm tired of this girl's work. I don't like this work at all, whatever. But all of a sudden, one shows up and there's a lottery ticket in it. You damn well better be sure that I'm going to find out if the lottery ticket's a winner. But I'm also, you can be damn well sure that I'm going to open your next promo as well because I'm going to be expecting a lottery ticket in that guy. You know, so again, it's just those strategies work. I don't care what anybody says, they work. So blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so this is what one of them ended up looking like. So you would open it up and then I would do all sorts of games. Again, I was really into sort of like tearing stuff up. I was into multiplicity and all of this. I was into transparency a lot. So you can see this is actually painted, printed on transparent plastic, whatever. It's just a way to actually create this little art piece that people can then look at. Yeah, I like this one really too. So this was it was a double one for transparency. So it was sort of weird when you opened it up to this part and then you would open it up and that would be what the real thing looked like. And then it would like lay on top of itself whatever. Anyway, that was, it was just something to keep them engaged and you're hoping that they hang on to this thing so that you then get a phone call from them. So that's the sort of idea behind doing that part. If you are going to do e-blasts, and again, I would suggest that you do, pretty much everybody in the world uses MailChimp to do it. It's extremely difficult for you to actually email, probably your service providers there'll be a cap on the number of emails that you can send out because they try to discourage spam. I don't know who your service provider is, but I can promise you that you hit that 25 recipient mark or something like that, so then all of a sudden your service provider is going to shut it down and they're not going to let you send an email out beyond that number. And again, it's different for everybody. MailChimp allows you to get around all of that, so you really can do e-blasts. The final thing that I will say to you about doing all of this is that your client list, who you actually really, do this with. You can buy lists. I don't really suggest doing that. I don't think that really works. In your own mind, you need to say to yourself, ask yourself, how many people can you really, really, really try to build a working relationship with? What's your guess? There's a group of people out there that you want to work for. But you really need to work them. You need to be sending emails to them. You need to be sending promo pieces to them. You need to be trying to get them on the phone. You're trying to get appointments to go see them, show them your portfolio. You're trying to get in front of them because you're trying to build a relationship. You're trying to do all of that work. How large a group of people can you do that with, realistically?
10?
You can be a little more ambitious than that. For me, I always tried to keep my list at around 100, 150. That's basically what I felt like I could do. So if you figure 150 people, that means over the course of a year, you can really focus on 3 people a week and get through that 150. Now, you'll probably do more than that in terms of trying to actually do it, but to really work it, that as a pretty reasonable number, and that's a manageable number. 2,000 is not a manageable number. 10,000 is out of the, I had an agent once, he pulled up a list, he actually paid for service, ran the list, ended up with 25,000 possible contacts. And I was like, okay, and where are you gonna, who are you gonna call first? You know, I mean, it was just absurd. So anyway, just think about those in that kind of terms, what you can really do and what you can really manage. But then that matters that you manage it, that you set up a schedule and it's like, okay, I'm doing, you know, all the A's I'm going to do this week, all the B's I'm going to do next week, all the C's I'm going to do the week after, whatever. And then I'm going to start the rotation again. And this has got to be methodical and planned out. And it's got to be persistent. Are we good on all of this? Okay. That is all that I have got for this. You should look through this. There's some interesting pieces in here. This is something that John Morrison put together or got his hands on. So parts of it seem, anyway, I'm just going to leave it at that. Are there any questions about any of this stuff? Okay. Are any of you guys shooting today? Perfect. And now I know that some guys, hang on just one second. I'm going to do quick attendance before everybody else leaves. Yeah, well then I'm here to actually look at stuff. In terms of the rest of you guys, I know some of you guys have already been working on stuff. Is everybody feeling good about kind of where things are at for their final for this class? Yeah, are things sort of like working out somewhat well? Any problems or anything else like that that I should know about? No, I got a lot of thumbs up. Okay, that's great. Then I'm here. I'm going to stop the recording now. I will